everybody. Better Spaces is a health and happiness solution for today's hybrid workplace. My name is Dr. Paul Kachoa with PAR5 Physical Therapy, and I've partnered with them to bring you an easy and educational workday session. So today's session is about effective stretching. So I call it Stretching 101. A little bit about me. I'm a physical therapist and owner of PAR5 Physical Therapy here in Randolph, New Jersey. I've been a physical therapist for over 20 years. I got my doctorate at Mercy College in New York and my undergraduate at Rutgers University in New Jersey. So if you have any questions while we're going through the slides here, you could always use the chat feature. And let me just pull this lower third off and then we'll get started with my slide. Come on into here. Excellent. So Stretching 101. So as a disclaimer, with all of my sessions, I have to tell people that this stuff that we're going to talk about today is just general knowledge for a general population. So if you're dealing with something specific, like a specific injury, please consult a medical professional. All right. So with the stretches that we're going to be going through today, make sure that you don't push through the pain. You go into it gently. We're going to talk about how to use your breathing to relax the muscles and make stretches more effective. And you try and combine them if you can throughout your day. I think that some of these exercises, some of these stretches can be done prior to activity and after activity. So we're going to talk about the difference. All right, so these are the three types of stretches that we're going to talk about. One is a joint mobilization. Now, a joint mobilization is where we take a specific joint and try and increase its mobility. It's different than stretching because we're going in and out of a range of motion to try and get things loose. Like say, for example, my elbow right here. If I want to mobilize that, there's a couple different ways to do that. I'm just going to bend and straighten it, right? So I'm getting my elbow to do what it's supposed to do, which is go completely straight and then go completely bent. Dynamic stretch is a stretch that is not held, but moved through a large range of motion. Say, for example, I wanted to stretch out my pec muscle, which is across the front part of my chest here. An example of that is just taking it through its full range of motion, shortening the muscle and then elongating the muscle. And then this type of stretch, a dynamic stretch, is usually performed for about 1 minute to 2 minutes. And you can do that prior to an activity or sports or other recreational activity. The static stretch is more of your classic stretch where we take a muscle and when we go through that length and range of motion and we just hold it. So that's usually held for 30 seconds is the bare minimum of time that you could hold the static stretch to create permanent change in the muscle and not have that muscle snap back into a shortened position, okay? So when we talk about joints in the body and how it functions, I love putting this up, and if you've been to my previous classes, the body functions on an alternating pattern of stability and mobility, so you should know this already. So when we look at the joints of our body, if this pattern is disrupted, then pain or injury is a result. So we want to make sure that your thoracic spine is mobile, your lower back is stable, your scapula, your shoulder blade in the back there is stable, your shoulder joint is mobile. We want to make sure that pattern fits and it works the right way. All right. So muscle tightness, if a muscle feels tight, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's short. So I always tell my clients that there is this neuromuscular connection from your brain to the muscle. And that is sort of like a volume switch where if the volume's all the way up, the muscle is under tension, a lot of tension, 100%. If that volume's all the way down, then the muscle is totally relaxed. So if you're lying down, we're going to be lying down on the floor in a minute, so make sure that you have enough room to move. When you're lying down and you're completely relaxed, that volume should be low. If, for example, if there's stress or soreness or a trigger point in the muscle, fatigue, some of these things can cause that volume switch of the tone, the muscle tone, to be a little bit higher than others. So it feels tight, but it's not necessarily short. One example that I give a lot of my clients is like sometimes their hamstrings, the back of the legs, the muscle in the back of their legs feels tight. And they say, oh, I stretch it out all the time. It still feels tight. a lot of times, if you have weak glutes, your hip muscle, if that weakness is there in your glutes, your body tends to try and create some tension elsewhere to hold you up against gravity or help you move through space. So if you're going to stand up or keep standing or trying to lift something, if the glute isn't active, the body says, all right, I'm going to use the hamstring to try and cheat and help with picking myself up or extending the back or extending the hip. It's not really designed for that. So that muscle is always on and always working. Not supposed to do that, and it just feels tight. So muscle tone can equate to a muscle tightness, but not necessarily a shortness. Okay, so let's go into some joint mobilizations here. I'm gonna flip out to my other screen. So I like to use a foam roller. Whenever we start to do some type of joint mobilization, we have to have something to kind of move our joint off of, right? So one of the simple ones that I like to do, and I think is applicable to posture and sport, is to mobilize my thoracic spine, okay? So one example is just to get down onto the foam here. I've got my knees bent, my hips are bent, and then I put this on my mid back. I don't want to be on my lower back. It has to be on the ribs. I keep my hips down. I put my hands across my chest and make sure that I don't cross my forearms with this. I take it and I wrap it around to create as much tension in my back as possible. So I'm stretching my back, and then I seesaw back and forth. So here, it's not a sit up. My force is going down into the floor to try and extend my mid back. I got to try and keep my abdominals on as I do this, and I repeatedly go through this motion. I scooch myself down, and I repeat that at the next segment. So I do this. There's like 13 segments that you can go through in your mid back. So you're going to try and get through each one here, just extending as far back as you can, trying to avoid hyperextending to the lower back. So my everything from this part down should be stable, and this part up is where I want that movement to be. Okay? So that's one thing. Another joint mobilization that I like to do is using a band. So these are bands over here I've got attached to my treadmill. These are called super bands, and they're stronger than a regular exercise band. So you can get these off of Amazon. They basically come in different colors, but the main thing that you want to look for is the width of the band. This one is about half an inch, and this green one is an inch. Depending upon the width, that's how much tension we can apply. So I can apply some tension through the red band, but I'm going to mobilize my hip here. So that's another thing that can get tight. We're going to try and mobilize that using this green band. So to get into the hip mobilization, I'm going to show you on my right hip here, so my outside hip. I'm going to put this up into my joint as high as I can into my hip, and then get into a kneeling position. Okay, so this thing is solid. It's heavy, and I'm sure that this is not going to move. So you could use a pole, you could use like a doorway or something to make sure that that band is not going to move. And then I create tension. So with my body position, I push this knee backwards, I slide this knee backwards, and then now the band is pulling me forward. I don't want to fight against the band. I want to allow that band to pull me forward. And again, that is going to extend through my hip. And then we want that mobilization, that joint mobilization, to be specific for the hip. So I'm not going to hyperextend my back. I'm not going to let my trunk extend, my belly stick out. So I'm going to keep my abdominals on, so that keeps my lower back stable, like our alternating pattern of stability and mobility. And we're just going to go in and out for this position, creating as much tension as I can through the band by my body position, and allowing that band to pull my hip into extension to get a greater stretch. Another joint mobilization that I like to use with the smaller band, and this is a rather simple one, is that if you put this over your shoulder and put this underneath your other foot, it keeps your shoulder down. And then here you can mobilize your shoulder joint. If you have a tight shoulder, you just take that overhead, and then that'll help with mobilizing the shoulder joint. So these are 3 examples that you can do to mobilize a joint and get things moving around. Where's my little stick? I'm going to move on to the next one. We're talking about some dynamic stretches. Here we are. So dynamic stretches are moves that are large and they take a muscle through a full range of motion. So for example, I'm going to do a leg swing. So this is one thing that I like to do. It's just a really easy swing. I'm holding on to my foam roll here. You could hold on to a table or your desk. And I'm just taking my hip through a full range of motion. I'm going as far forward as I can and as far back as I can. As I'm doing this, again, lower back, try to keep that stable. I don't want my lower back to arch or extend. I want that to be stable. Lower back is stable. And I get this hip swing through the hip, just kind of swinging it forward and backward. I keep my knees straight as much as I can. I'll feel a little bit of stretch in the front in my hamstring, and I'll feel a little bit of stretch in the back position for my front part of my hip, maybe into my quad. So that's a dynamic hip stretch. We could also do down on the ground, a dynamic stretch, sort of like a cat-camel type of movement, where we have the hands below the shoulders and then the knees below the hips. And then we can kind of just take our spine through a dynamic stretch here, stretching out the back and the joints in our spine. Head goes down, and then head comes up. As you extend, flex, your head goes down, and your head comes up. As you do this, we want to make sure that the movement comes from the pelvis, the lower back, and the mid back, and the head, so you have a full range of motion as you're going through this. Another dynamic stretch from this position I like to get into is called a groiner. And we just take one leg and we put it out where their hands are. So here I've got this long separation between one foot and the back knee. And I could take my hips and go forward and backward. Keeping my hands down by my lead foot. My front foot is flat. My hands are flat on the ground. I've got this right knee really far back. And I bring my hips forward and backward. This is a more global stretch, and then I'm getting it in the front part of this hip here. I'm getting it to this hip, and then when I go back with my hips, I get into this front hamstring over here. So it's not a very specific stretch, but it is a dynamic stretch in that we're going through a large range of motion without stopping. So I could just do the other side too, so you could see, trying to make that movement as big as possible. And dynamic stretches are good prior to activity or exercise because they help to warm up your body and improve blood flow. Static stretches, which we're getting into next, are long held stretches at 30 seconds, and they actually inhibit the muscle from creating tension or force. So if you're going to say, I'm going to go run a race or play golf, if you're holding a static stretch prior to going out, that means you're actually making yourself weaker. We want to be able to do those dynamic stretches prior to activity and then the static stretches after. Alrighty, so that's a couple of the dynamic stretches that I like. Let's go into some static stretches. So the static stretches are the ones that are very classic. You're just going to hold this position. One really quick example, and I love to do this as a recovery. At the end of the day, I'm going to lay down my foam roll on the ground. I'm going to sit right on the end here. I've got my knees bent, balancing on here, and I just lie down. Got my head, spine, hips on the foam roller, and I just take my arms and I just kind of lay them out. So in this position, it's just a static pec stretch and shoulder stretch. I'm just going to let my arms go, and I want my body and my muscles to relax. So with the static stretch, our bare minimum time is that we're going to hold this for 30 seconds. And you could do this on the floor as well without the foam, or just roll up a towel to kind of go up your spine. And then you concentrate on your breathing. So breathing is our way to reduce muscle tone and reduce the level of threat. When we go into a stretch, the first thing is that, oh, it feels a little bit uncomfortable. I don't want to go into that position. So your body will tense up. We want the muscle in your body to relax. So we're going to go in and out through the nose. 2-second inhale through the nose and a 4-second exhale through the nose. You could stop or pause your breathing at the top or bottom of your breath as needed, as you feel comfortable. But we want to go 2 seconds in and then 4 seconds out. So that long exhale, the short inhale, will tap into your parasympathetic nervous system, it's called, to help you relax and allow that muscle to elongate. All right? So that's one pec stretch, lying down. Another one is our classic little hamstring stretch where we kind of take one foot and straighten it out. The other leg, I like to bend it like this to keep that foot on the instep. That reduces the stress on this knee. And then I can just go forward and try and stretch and reach for my foot. Now, the key thing with this, I'll show you on my other leg here, is that the back, we don't want the back to really round out. So if I really round out and then bring my chin down, I can reach my foot here. It's basically borrowing range of motion from my lower back. So the stretch becomes less effective into the hamstring. We go into and we feel the stretch, but it's like I have to search for that. I have to go farther and deeper into the range. The hamstring is attached to your sit bone on your pelvis, so we want to make sure that that's stable. Anytime that we do a static stretch, we want to make sure that both ends of the muscle are as stable as possible, because if we pull one and the other end isn't stable, it's just going to come along and we're going to try and search for that stretch. So from here, what we want to do is just sit up as tall as we can. That way we create a better position of the pelvis, and already I feel that stretch already. I don't need to bend forward. If I change position of where that muscle is attached, I pull it back and then I get a stretch already, and I'm going to hold this for 30 seconds. Okay? The other stretch I like to do is my hip flexor stretch, and we can get into the quad in this position. It's this half kneeling position. So the hip flexor is attached, it starts on your lower back. It dives through the abdominal cavity and then it inserts into the front part of your hip. It basically lifts your knee up like this. It can get adaptively short if you do sit for prolonged periods of time. So this is a good one to kind of be a posture fix for your lower back as well. The key thing, again, we have to make sure that the attachment points are going to be stable. So the first thing I want to do is I get into this position is just squeeze my right butt cheek. If I squeeze that butt cheek, that rotates the pelvis in a better position. It stabilizes the hip. And then I activate my abdominals. I pull my belly, my belly button into my spine. That stabilizes my spine. So I've got the two parts of that muscle stabilized. And then keeping those muscles on, I'm going to go into my stretch. As I bring my pelvis forward, then I start to feel a much more stronger stretch earlier. A lot of times I see clients just come in here and just kind of go in like this. Just kind of open up the belly, bring the hip forward. And again, they're searching for the stretch and not getting it. It's not very specific. And then they wind up hurting their back. You want to make sure that the 2 points are stabilized, belly tight, glute tight. And then when you bring your hip forward, we get that stretch very specific in the muscle that we intend to stretch. And it's early in the range of motion. We don't have to go too far. So that's a 30-second hold. Now we can turn this up into what we call a couch stretch, where we include the hip flexor and the quad muscle by using a chair. I could bring this forward. And then what I'm going to do, hopefully you could see this, the side view, yeah? I'm going to get down on all fours in front of here, and I'm going to put my left foot up on top. So you can see how my knee is on the ground still. My left foot's up top. I can combine the movement that we did before, which is this groiner stretch with my foot out in front. And then I come up into this position here. So here I've got a lot more bend on my rear foot, my rear leg. But the same principles apply for any static stretch. I want to keep this abdominal on. I want to keep my left butt cheek on. I want to feel this long stretch down the quad muscle on this left side. So that's going to be a 30-second. This is called the couch stretch. You could also do this in standing in a couch or a chair. To get out of that, just kind of get down on all fours. To do it in standing, I'll turn this to the side so you can see. I'll just get my same position here with my knee on the seat and my foot on the back of the chair. And then I can come up here again, stabilizing my core, stabilizing my glute, and then I have that same stretch on this position. So you could do this in standing if you like, or if you're at work or stuck at a desk, you pop up, get your chair into this position, and you can kind of put your leg up. So that'll stretch out the hip. The more flexible you are in the front part of your hip, the more effective and efficient your glute muscle can fire.